Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all very warmly to this webinar on a 5-point plan to rapidly scale up biomethane production and use. Biomethane is one important contribution to greenhouse gas mitigation, and we have a really exceptional lineup of speakers today to introduce us to the key issues that are necessary to manage to tackle the rapid scale up of biomethane. We will have 3 parts of this webinar. The first part will be the introduction to the vision document that kind of tries to pull together all these key issues. And then we will have statements on the role of policy and regulation, because that is going to be critical to manage this rapid scale up. And finally, we will have a couple of speakers that are going to talk about the role of technology and market development that is ongoing and how their experiences as project developers are. So it will be a very interesting program, a very broad program covering all the essential issues that surround the question of scaling up biomethane. To start with, I would like to shortly give the floor to Alan Sherrar. He is editor-in-chief of Bioenergy International, the official magazine of WBA, of the World Bioenergy Association. And I would like Alan to just say a few words about Bioenergy International. Please, Alan.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much for those kind words, Christian. Yes, I work for Bioenergy International. We're a trade publication on biomass for energy, and I'll just have really 2 slides here. Bear with me 2 seconds. Where is the, there we go. We're a trade publication, founded already back in 2001, which means we're almost dinosaurs in the bioenergy trade magazine industry. It's a subscription English language-based magazine with a media platform or a website. And we're focused on biomass to energy value systems, of which, of course, biomethane, or renewable natural gas, as people across the pond like to call it, is one of those areas. And a particular, let's say, attribute or a focus of Bioenergy International is we very much like the power of examples. So we spend a lot of time and editorial focus on sussing out people and companies who are doing things, be it in solid biomass, liquid biofuels, or biogas solutions. And so anybody who is not already a reader or subscriber, there's a little offer at the end of the presentation, which you'll get with the presentation materials.
Okay, so you will send your slides after
absolutely, yeah. So with that, I'll give the floor back to Christian.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alan. I actually forgot to introduce myself. I'm chairing the World Bioenergy Association. My name is Christian Rakosch. I'm very glad to host this webinar today. And that really brings me to the key person in this context, which is Ferro Lefebvre. Ferro has been the lead author and the initiator of this vision document, and he was also the person that actually suggested to present that to the wider audience around the world, and to discuss it with people from across the globe. How do we manage to push biomethane forward? Ferro, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. I'll just share my screen. Is that working okay?
It's not yet shared.
It's okay?
No.
Oh, there must be okay, hold on. That better? No. Okay. So yeah, my name is Ferro Lefebvre. I'm a board member at the, sorry, can I just check, which version are you seeing? Because I can't, are you seeing the speaker
We
view?
still
Or?
don't see the slides. Bharadwaj, can you jump in?
Yeah, I'll share. I think there seems to be an issue, but I'll share my share the slides I have with me, Farwa.
Okay.
And try to yeah, solve it before that.
Okay, you let me know when I can speak, because, okay, perfect. Okay, great. So my name is Ferry Lefebvre. I'm a board member at the World Bioenergy Association. As I said, one of the authors of this vision document. I also work for Biogas, which is Spain's gas transmission system operator, with a company that's very focused on renewable gases, which on the biomethane side, through our subsidiary company, Biogas Renewable, or Biogas Renewables, we have 20 biomethane projects in development. And we've also been appointed to develop Spain's guarantees of origin scheme for renewable gases. In the next 10 minutes, I just want to give an overview of what the vision document is all about, why we thought now was the time to produce it, what it includes, and its key recommendations. And then the idea is these recommendations will be explored more in detail with the expert speakers. And the idea is that recommendations of this publication are suitable globally. I think we have 80 countries connected or represented on this webinar. So really, the idea is a global application, but to be honest, certain markets in Europe and the US are more developed. So a lot of the best practices are drawing from these smaller pool of markets. Next slide, please. So the first thing to say is that the current market and policy context really is creating unprecedented interest in biomethane. Climate commitments have really strengthened dramatically over the past 2 or 3 years. So we now have 85% of global energy-related CO2 emissions covered by a net zero commitment. The question is, what does that mean? Well, it means you need to employ all the viable technology solutions to get there. Of course, it's a hugely ambitious goal. So across energy efficiency, across renewables, across carbon capture, etc. But recent analysis from the IEA indicated that around half of the emission reductions to get to net zero come from technologies which aren't yet mature. So maybe at a prototype stage or a demonstration stage, etc. So when we flip this and we look at biomethane, we can really see it's a low-hanging fruit example. We have a technology which is mature. So you already have over 1,000 plants in Europe, globally around 7 billion cubic meters BCM of production. It can be cost competitive. So looking at the European market before the energy crisis, which of course started last year, it had a cost premium over natural gas. Throughout last year, the natural gas, the TTF hub in the Netherlands, the month-ahead prices were actually above the top end of the biomethane production range. So, I mean, those conditions are likely not going to continue in the long term, but certainly, it's something that can be competitive in certain contexts. Can you go back a slide, please? Can be competitive in certain contexts, and is, otherwise is not far away from being competitive. Also, we need to consider the wider benefits, right? So whether it's, supporting waste management, rural development and employment, also the co-products on the digestate, biogenic CO2, all of these have a value. Recent analysis from the European Biogas Association and Guidehouse tried to estimate what that might be and came up with a range of between 80 and 175 euros per megawatt hour, depending on the assumptions you use. So aside from its energy value, it has huge wider environmental, societal value as well. It's also true that the outbreak of the conflict in Ukraine has pushed biomethane into the spotlight. So the REPowerEU goal for 35 BCM of biomethane by 2030, that's 10% of last year's natural gas demand in the EU. And by the time we arrive at 2030, that would probably be a bigger share because of the various policy levers in that plan to reduce consumption. So phasing away from Russian gas means some diversification and more reliance on LNG imports on the global market. So having a certain part of your methane production, which is produced domestically, has a stable cost profile, is certainly beneficial in the context of maybe shielding part of demand from the global demand trends in the LNG market, depending on how much new production capacity comes online, how much demand in Asia will increase, etc., and prices that you can't control. Okay, so given all these factors, certainly we could expect biomethane would grow. So in the IEA's net zero by 2050 scenario, the expansion in consumption is 30 times 2021 levels by 2050. Next slide, please. So that was kind of the why we wanted to do the document now. And now really I want to talk here about what the vision document is all about. So the first thing to say is that there's no one policy measure that's gonna, in any given country, that's gonna scale up biomethane. It really needs kind of a holistic basket of multiple actions to grow the market. So that's to improve access to feedstocks, particularly sustainable feedstocks, to make incremental improvements in the technology, and also to stimulate project delivery. France is a really great example. So there, a multiple set of levers. So setting targets, both for renewable gases and also injection in the gas network, having production support through a feed-in tariff, mapping out the feedstock resources and also how they overlap with gas networks, and splitting the cost of connection between the producer and the gas network operator, among other measures, has meant that if you look at the graph between 2017 and 2021, so the 5-year period, over half of the expansion of new biomethane plants in Europe was in France. So that's great for them, but there are too few similar cases, both in Europe, thinking about that scale up in the REPowerEU plan, but also globally, where there's countries with vast untapped feedstock resources, but with no strategy or plan in place to scale up biomethane. So we wanted to produce this vision document where we cover the whole value chain, so looking at feedstocks, looking at technology optimization, looking at the interaction with gas networks, and also policies and regulation. And we're very lucky to count on the input of over 40 expert stakeholders in the production of this document, many of which are participating today. Next slide, please. So for each of the 5 areas, we had kind of we discussed kind of best practices in various different markets, and then we kind of have one overall recommendation we thought was fundamental. So because this is just a short overview, I just share the main key recommendation for each sector here. So in terms of scaling up, untapped waste feedstock resources is the starting point. Of course, the use of these facilitates sustainable waste management. These often have the lowest associated life cycle emissions for the biomethane produced. And also their use in certain cases can avoid the direct emissions of methane that would occur to the atmosphere if they were left unmanaged. So here, key steps are mapping out those resources to set realistic targets and also to help project developers in terms of where they site their production facilities. Also waste management frameworks that maybe put a cost on alternatives that are less sustainable, whether that's landfilling or incineration of biogenic wastes. And also the segregation and collection of the biogenic fraction of municipal waste, which is certainly on the cards in Europe, but in other markets outside of Europe, less so. On the technology side, anaerobic digestion is mature, as I said. That's not to say there aren't incremental opportunities to improve it, and minimizing methane leakage is really fundamental. So this involves, vigilant storage of digestate and the substrates, so gas-tight storage there, and also monitoring, focus monitoring to detect where methane slip may occur and remediate that. And we have one of our expert speakers covering that in more detail later on. On the technology side, one point of interest is also Europe has around 19,000 biogas electricity plants. So there is an open question of if some of those may be able to shift to biomethane in support of the REPowerEU goal. So therefore avoiding multi-year development timescales. And maybe the subset that would be most suitable would be projects who have expiring subsidy support, maybe expiring feed-in tariff on the electricity side, have a suitable enough capacity to make it worthwhile to do the conversion to biomethane, have a sustainable feedstock supply, and also market access, so maybe in the vicinity of a gas network pipeline. But this is certainly an area that needs further analysis. Speaking of gas networks, certainly injection into gas networks where they're available in a country is a key step, as a means to connect feedstocks which may be rural, dispersed with centers of demand, diversifying the customer base for a producer to not be reliant only on one off-taker in the local vicinity, which could be an investment risk, and also accessing the storage that the network provides in itself. And there's positive examples here. For example, Denmark last year already surpassed a 25% biomethane share in its network. And we thought to enable this, certainly guarantees of origin scheme are key in terms of tracking what goes in and virtually balance it with what is consumed, and therefore allowing the off-takers who may be paying a premium for biomethane or renewable natural gas to claim that consumption. Next slide, please. So, so the most dynamic biomethane markets have either a supply side policy lever or a demand side support policy, or both. There's not really much getting away from that. You can facilitate and map your feedstocks as much as you want, but if you're not supporting the production and the demand, it's unlikely the market's going to grow very quickly. On the production side, certain markets use the feed-in tariff or feed-in premium. So France is an example there, with differentiation between the types of feedstock used or the scale of plant in terms of the tariff. In the electricity sector, of course, there's been a shift away from feed-in tariffs more to auctions that allow competition and therefore certainly cost reduction. So that's another potential option. On the demand side, sectoral targets have been used. So at the EU level, the EU's sub-target in the Renewable Energy Directive for advanced biofuels and transport, biomethane can qualify there. But that's one example. Different countries have used different mechanisms. So in Sweden, fiscal policy; in the UK and Italy, certificate schemes; in California, the low carbon fuel standard, which is a carbon intensity based scheme which allows different fuels, low carbon fuels, compete against each other based on the emissions reduction they offer relative to cost. And on the regulation side, of course, biomethane cuts across waste, it cuts across energy, agriculture. So there's lots of different permits and approvals are needed. This takes a long time. So certainly in a best case scenario, getting the approvals, constructing a plant, maybe 2 years, but in certain cases over 5 years. So if you put that in the context of Repower EU and 5,000 new plants to meet that goal, you can see if you're talking about multi-year approvals, it puts that goal at risk. So faster permitting can certainly be improved or realized with increasing the resources. So the competencies and the staffing levels in harnessing digitalization, and also streamlining through one-stop shops and go-to areas. Next slide. So I'll leave you there with the where you can find the vision document, and certainly we'll leave it to the expert speakers to cover these different recommendations in more detail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Feroa. Thank you very much for presenting your paper, and also for taking the initiative and suggesting to do this webinar to have a really global discussion on the proposals of how to scale up biomethane use rapidly. The next speaker is Peter Seniewski from the International Energy Agency. Peter, you are the lead gas analyst, and my question to you is, how do you see the outlook for biogas? How optimistic was the scenario that Feroa was mentioning? Was that, from your view, a kind of cautious suggestion of growth rates, or was it very ambitious?
Thank you very much, Christian. I hope everyone hears me clearly and can see my screen as well. And thank you very much for the invitation. And indeed, you know, Feroa, that was a very good run through of all the elements I feel that pertain to biomethane deployment globally. And indeed, the NZE is our strongest and most ambitious scenario for meeting global climate targets. So, you know, in that scenario, we push very hard on all clean fuels and technologies. And so naturally, you know, biomethane forms an essential part of that overall push to reduce emissions rapidly, both this decade and out to 2050 and beyond. So what I'm going to do today in the very brief moments I have is just to show you two slides using another scenario, so the announced pledges scenario, and that one's slightly different from the NZE in that we take individual government climate targets and assume that they are met on time and in full, and we look at where that takes the global energy system, and in this case, where it takes biogases. So it is a slightly different picture, but nonetheless, it's one of growth, and that's true across all of our scenarios. And of course, you know, as Farah mentioned very aptly, we have a context today of very high gas prices in several parts of the world. But what we need to remind ourselves of is that high prices come and go, and really, of course, today, biomethane looks more cost competitive than it did in the past, but we shouldn't use this as a license to stop policy support or anything of that nature. Biomethane and biogases require significant support if they're to be scaled up at the rate that we envision them in our APS or announced pledges scenario. And there's a number of different policies to do that. So, you know, as mentioned, feed-in tariffs, tenders, favorable tax regimes, and there's also, I guess, in a more developing world context, a need to strengthen resource management and waste management policies in particular, and to develop routes towards monetizing sustainable feedstocks in a way where they currently have not been. And that's really, if that happens, then there's a huge potential for biomethane to be developed in emerging market and developing economies. Now, of course, the underpinning for that is not just those robust waste management policies, but also crediting things like methane avoidance, the co-benefits such as developing sustainable and potentially biofertilizers from digestate and so on. So our latest data points to significant growth indeed. Today, there's something around 35 BCM equivalent of biogas consumed around the world. And most of that comes directly from the direct use of biogas in heat and electricity or as a clean cooking fuel. And less than 20% today is converted to biomethane. But if we look ahead to 2050, that share becomes much larger. A large amount of biomethane gets injected into gas grids for use in industry, in power and buildings, and that's what makes it so versatile, that it's essentially a drop-in substitute for natural gas. And that means that its share of overall grid-connected gases reaches well above 10%. Now, of course, biomethane gets used in all those sectors, but the drivers of growth are really different depending on where you are in the world. So in our analysis, we note that advanced economies already have fairly well-developed gas infrastructure in most cases. So if we decompose the drivers of the increase in biomethane, we see that in advanced economies, biomethane replaces natural gas for the most part. It also replaces coal and replaces oil where it's used for transport, for example. But in emerging markets, the size of the pie is much greater. There's 120 BCM of biomethane developed by 2050. And if you'll note, more of that biomethane actually ends up replacing coal and replacing oil rather than natural gas. So it brings that additional emissions avoidance benefit to those emerging economies where natural gas developed infrastructure may not be as high a part of the overall energy mix. So I just wanted to leave you with those brief insights from our latest analysis and welcome any questions and look forward to the discussion. Thanks very much. And Christian, back to you.
Thank you very much. That was amazing. The only question that you didn't answer was how optimistic are you if we're going to achieve this?
So as Faro says, and as we all know, the REPowerEU plan is very ambitious. 35 BCM by 2030 is indeed a high watermark target for the industry. I've been to various conferences where there's a lot of interest now in biomethane, and more stakeholders and players are entering the market. I think personally the key bottleneck to developing it, at least here in Europe, is permitting. As Farah says, it takes a very, very long time to get a permit for developing biomethane, up to 5 years, in some cases 7 years from inception to actually laying shovels in the ground. And so if we're going to meet those targets, like for wind and solar and like for other distributed renewable resources, we need to bring down the time it takes to permit those resources here in Europe. For the rest of the world, it's about putting in policies in place to really, valorize those feedstocks in a responsible way and build out the resource management required to develop them. I'm optimistic, as we all are at the IEA. So, I hope it can happen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was very, very much to the point. Our next speaker is Julia Laura Kanzian. She is Secretary General of the European Biogas Association. Welcome, Julia. And my question to you is, how do you see that you're working directly in Brussels on European policies? Do you feel that on the one side, the ambitions that have been expressed are matched by the supporting policies, or is this not yet the case?
Thank you, Christian. A very relevant question indeed. And at the moment, we are really working actively to make sure that the regulatory drivers are matching the need to deliver on biomethane capacity at European level. So I've prepared a little presentation with 2 slides of introduction. Some of these numbers you have already heard, but I think it's good to set the scene while keeping on time. So first of all, at the moment, Europe produces 18.4 combined biogas and biomethane billion cubic meters. And we have around 19,000 plants of biogas and a bit more than 1,000 plants of biomethane that were operational in 2021. This represents 20% year-on-year growth from 2020 to 2021, but we need to consider that those were really difficult years for the value chain, especially in terms of supply chains and lead times. We expect a steeper growth for 2022. Now, you mentioned that we need a supportive legislative framework, and this is the case. I will mention 4 pillars, which are really matching actually what was brought to the table by Faro before, and partially also by Peter. So as you know, the European Commission has included in its REPowerEU plan, the plan that succeeded, that was put on the table right after the geopolitical crisis and the Russian aggression to Ukraine happened. And this plan features a target, which is 35 billion cubic meters to be reached by 2030 in the EU. Now, in terms of potential, of sustainable potential of biomass, we can get there, but we absolutely need the right regulatory target. And specifically, we need a high level of planning. So we need to be anchoring this 35 BCM target in legislation and making sure that there are solid trajectory and milestones to achieve it. Now, we have seen that there is a legislation, the gas package, that is being discussed in the European Union at the moment, and it seems that there are some possibilities to anchor this target there. So we're really supportive of this process. The second sphere on which we need to operate is market. We need to guarantee easy and good market access to operators, and this translates into having faster permitting procedures, but also having a clear right to inject for operators. Third, and not by importance, is absolutely finance. So using dedicating and innovative finance instruments to mitigate the risk and have the needed capital to roll out biomethane at scale. And last but not least, making sure that we will be capable to mobilize the necessary sustainable feedstock, but also tap into those sustainable feedstock that are a bit lagging behind. So urban wastewater and other sustainable crops. So here you see a typical plant of biomethane with its inputs, its co-products and its outputs. And just to give you an idea, so because our value chain is so integrated and it's so complex, there are quite a lot of different legislative dossiers in the EU that are impacting directly on the possibility to scale up and on the possibility to have a good market for biomethane. So you see on the left-hand side, the Renewable Energy Directive that is setting a set of sustainability criteria for biomethane that is impacting also on the possibility to mobilize and on the choice that operators will make about the feedstock. In the center of the slide, you see the co-products, so the possibility of utilizing biogenic CO2 or storing it, and the digestate. At the moment, we are tragically missing, I would say, a regulatory sphere to really push for utilization of biogenic carbon dioxide. And apparently, there is some work happening on this at the moment. As for digestates, also here we need further mobilization, and this year will be a key year with the Soil Health Law and the Integrated Nutrient Management Action Plan in the EU to make sure that we can mobilize and make the best use of digestate. And as for the outputs, the full revision of the climate and energy package in Europe will impact, of course, the use that we will make of biomethane in the future. So we are still waiting for the final versions of the directives and regulation that will constitute this framework in the EU. I will now share just a little word about something that was touched upon in the beginning. So the study that was run by Guidehouse on the monetization of biomethane whole system benefits. Why is this important on the regulatory sphere? Well, basically, the study itself underlines the fact that the environmental, economic, and social benefits that we can unlock through the scale-up of the biomethane sector are going well beyond the renewable energy provisions. I will not read for you the conclusions of the study, which are really visible on this slide. But what I would like to underline here is that we need to take into consideration that these benefits are going beyond renewable energy provision. So when designing the policies and the incentives and the support schemes for biomethane, policymakers should actually acknowledge the benefits that are going beyond the creation of renewable energy, so waste management, soil health, for example, or the capture and reutilization of biogenic CO2. I will conclude here and I'll be available for questions.
Many thanks, Julia. There was a question asking for the funding. I mean, I think Ferro already made the point that there will be financial support necessary. You also suggested that there are lots of external benefits that kind of don't really show up in funding. So will the European Union have a role regarding funding in terms of policies, for example, facilitating the subsidies in the member states, or is this all up to the member states?
Well, I think this is a complex question. So first of all, let me say that depending on the stage of development of the biomethane sector in the various member states, we might need different portfolios of incentives to make sure that the biomethane is scaled up. But one point is for certain, a no-regret target should be set so that it gives the right message to the market. When it comes in general to subsidies, it's important also to monitor what is happening at European Union level. Today is an important day in Europe. We will see the launch of an initiative that is really pushing for keeping manufacturing technology in Europe. And we will see, but this will basically push for strategic autonomy and the manufacturing of technologies that will be needed also for the biomethane supply chain in the EU. So this is something that we are really counting on. But as I said, this is a complex question. Depending on the market and the starting point and the condition, a different portfolio of measures will be needed at member state level, at least.
Thank you very much, Julia. That brings us to the situation in one of the countries that has been really successful in developing biogas markets in the past, which is Germany. And I would like to welcome Dirk Bonse. He's from the German Biogas Association. Dirk, can you talk a little bit about the situation of biomethane development in Germany and the way you see this going forward?
Yes, it'll be a pleasure. I'm trying to share my screen. Do you see it by any chance?
Yes, we do.
Okay, very fine. So yeah, thanks a lot. As said, my name is Dirk Bonse. I'm the head of renewable gases at the German Biogas Association. And I'm happy to share a few insights about the German market, which is relatively well developed. We all know Germany has the biggest output of biogas and biomethane. Currently, it seems that we are going to be outpaced maybe sooner or later because of some regulation barriers, which, by the way, is also being addressed by the EBA in the course of the biomethane industry partnership, where several task forces are built, and currently, as we speak, are developing also action plans and suggestions and recommendations for the upscale of biomethane. So I'm citing here a slide or a figure from the renowned European Biogas Association, because we all have heard 35 billion cubic meters of biomethane have to be produced or be available by 2030, which is quite an abstract number, possibly. But if we break that down, it could be.
Could you just go to the presentation mode?
Oh yeah, sure, of course. Sorry for that. Should coming up now. All right, so here we go. So basically, the figure of 35 billion cubic meters does not sound that abstract anymore if we break it down to possibly 4,000 smaller or 1,000 larger scale digestion plants. What we have to address, I think this is common sense on European level, but particularly in Germany. We have, for example, a maximum rated output. This was temporarily lifted, 20 megawatt. And this was only lifted due to the war in Ukraine. What we also need to address, we have heard it as already, we need more flexibility in substrate use. We also need to facilitate more substrates. They, of course, have somehow to be then certified, and they also have to be locked, let's say, and they also have to be accountable. And this is particularly in Germany a problem. We have a system here which is called NABISI. Basically, it's from a federal ministry of agriculture and nutrition. You know, for example, it's an open Excel file. So this is really a drag, excuse me, French, because they do manual failures in it. For example, maize straw, I'm talking about straw, not about maize itself, was accidentally labeled as non-accountable for fuels, for example. So not for advanced fuels. So these are problems that we also have on a manual, man-made level, let's say, woman-made level. So that matters. And of course, especially in Germany, we have issues with the local permission. We have heard it already. Germany has a lead time of 3 years approximately, but it should be actually done in 3 months. Which is more or less not possible at the moment in Germany. So we also have broken down the figures a bit, what Germany alone can release, for example, within this Repower EU plan. And summarized, we can release 234 terawatts from where we already have almost 100 terawatt hours developed. And this actually would correspond already to 42% of today's natural gas imports from Russia. And we can even heighten or increase this level by methanation if we, for example, take hydrogen, combine it with the CO2 from the methanation process, and then we can methanize and create methane again. By the way, from my point of view, this is at the moment the only way to utilize hydrogen properly, because the gas grids are not yet ready for it. Particularly looking at Germany, as you can see here on the left-hand side, we have a sharp decline in biogas installations. On the other hand, we have at the same time, on the right-hand side, an increase of biomethane production. So this actually shows us that the plants in Germany now are switching. So from just bringing electricity from more or less raw biogas, 100% load into the grids, and they are now remotely controlled, and they have now overcapacities of biomethane. And they now look to switch or to integrate biomethane production into their business plan. Where does biomethane goes at the moment in Germany? As you can see here, the lion's share, the green line, is still, of course, electricity. But I want to draw your attraction to the yellow line, which shows us a doubling of the use in transport and a fuel section since 2018. The reason is that Germany adopted, at least for fuels, for sustainable fuels, the RED II and RED I relatively early. As you can see here as well, it does not go on costs of the other utilization parts. So there is more biomethane available for the fuel sector, but it does not go on account of the other, like heat, for example, or electricity. So this shows actually that we have a huge potential in Germany. We just need to release it, especially by addressing the permitting approvals on a local level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dirk. I mean, one question that comes to my mind is, I mean, why has been this tremendous drop of plant installations? Was that because there is no more resources available for producing biogas, or could you comment on that shortly?
Yes, of course. It's based on the fact that the local, the national Renewable Energy Directive is phasing out. So we had, let's say, since 2003 or so, we had these huge incentives. This is being shown in these graphs, for example, 2009, 2010, 2011. So they benefit from the subsidies that were paid. But they're all now falling out of these subsidy schemes, and they cannot apply again. So that is the reason why there's a shift in the utilization. So it's not, it's absolutely not a problem of availability. I mean, as you know, in Germany, we started with maize. So of course, today nobody wants to have maize anymore in a digester, which we are addressing as well on several levels. For example, a single biogas plant cannot use more than 40% maize as a substrate. But we are utilizing many other substrates, manual, of course, but also Germany is developing interesting methods to utilize straw, for example, lignocellulosic material, which was predominantly or was before not really digestible, but there are coming ways. So pretty optimistic that we also can shift the substrates, which is very important.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Now let's move to our next speaker. As we are a global organization, of course, we don't only want to look at Europe, and I'm very glad to introduce now Gaurav Kumar to you. He is from the Indian Biogas Association. And my question to you, Gaurav, is how is the biogas development in India going ahead? Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Glad to be a part of this discussion, panel discussion. So when you talk about India, Government of India is right now very bullish about renewable energy, and that too about bioenergy. In fact, if I remember our Honorable Prime Minister in COP26, he talked about this Panchamrit, this 5-point agenda. In that, he explicitly talked about the fact that by 2070, India wants to be, in net zero domain. Apart from this, India also wants to reduce its 50% fossil dependency, or other way around, make sure that we are dependent on renewable energy by 2030 as far as the energy is concerned. So a lot of push is coming from the government side when you talk about the overall scenario. So normally what we do, we talk about the technical bucket, financial bucket, and the social bucket. So a lot of technical push is coming, especially from the R&D point of view, especially from the new feedstock perspective. For example, now paddy straw to biogas is something in India, you can definitely see as well, even the large scale biogas plant based on paddy straw to biogas. Yeah. And a lot of money goes in R&D as well. In fact, when you even talk about hydrogen, India is coming up like anything. But let's come back to the biogas part. So coming to the financial part, right now, when you just consider the whole value chain, government is trying to make sure that all the nodes are in place, whether you talk from the substrate availability point of view. Right now I'm talking about the large scale biogas plant, or whether you talk about the offtake of, let's say, biomethane as such, or compressed biogas, whatever you call it. And along with this, government is also right now planning how to really ensure the smooth supply chain of the bioslurry as well. So in fact, if I just go back in time, let's say a couple of years ago, we didn't have the right technicalities in place of the bioslurry as well. So if I need to go and sell it in the market, it was always a big question mark. So at least the technical part is in place. Fertilizer Control Order already has recognized that. And apart from this, now Government of India is also trying to push the biofertilizer by giving MDA. What I mean by MDA is the market development assistance, so that there is an acceptability, so that there is a push, and of course ultimately the market has to pull it, as simple as it. Apart from this, in fact, Government of India recently has also announced about the CFA, or the capex based subsidy for the bio CNG plant or biogas plant in general. This also encompasses the small scale biogas plant, which are mainly driven from the social perspective, and the large scale biogas plant, as you know, that is mainly driven by the business side. Yeah. And Government of India has already allocated almost, I would say, 80 billion or something like this when you talk about the large scale biogas plant from the capex subsidy perspective. And there is a scheme called Satat in India, and under that, all the oil marketing companies, they will be buying, or they are already buying, by the way, the CBG, which is being produced by any biogas plant, and you can have a long-term contract with them, and there is a fixed price, and you can be rest assured that you'll be able to sell it. So as I told you at the beginning, that in India, from the policy perspective, a lot of push is being given. And in fact, Satat also talks about the fact that they want to have the 5,000 biogas plant. This they announced around 4 years back. Then Corona came, and then things didn't go the way they planned. But nevertheless, it's coming back to the pace, and we are very hopeful that the biogas industry in general will really see some good time in India. And apart from this, we can talk from the energy perspective, we can talk from the biofertilizer perspective, but we should also talk from the waste management perspective. So Government of India has got the Clean India campaign, Swachh Bharat mission. And under that, they are also giving a lot of push also to ensure that all this organic waste, they are scientifically treated. This can be small biogas plant as well as the large centralized biogas plant. So coming back to your question, in fact, about the scenario right now, so it's very optimistic. In fact, a lot of things are happening on ground, not only at policy level, but on ground also you can see a lot of plants are coming. And the good thing is that even these oil marketing companies, they are putting their own plant as well. So it's not that they are simply directing and just telling that do that, but they are also in the game of the whole biogas industry. So that's just in a nutshell. In fact, I just wanted to take my heart out instead of having all the slides, etc. But it's quite positive as far as the biogas industry in India is concerned at this moment of time.
That's great. Great news from India. Just one little question. What is the relationship between biomethane and biogas development? Is biomethane starting to become more important? How important is it in relation? Can you just say a few words on that?
Of course. So, biomethane, in fact, when you talk about biomethane, Government of India normally says that you have, let's say, 2,500 cubic meter of biogas per day, then it makes sense to upgrade the biogas, compress it, and then sell it. Below that, in fact, you can consider those plants as a typical biogas plant. Government of India has got a separate policy as well for the small scale biogas units. They have got the subsidy scheme as well, the new subsidy scheme, in fact. So these two are, in fact, interlinked, if you see, but from the size perspective, you have to draw one line. And this line is at 2,500 cubic meter per day of biogas generation.
Thank you very much for that clarification. And that brings me to our next speaker. Jinlei Feng is Program Officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency. Jinlei, the floor is yours.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much. And first, I would like to thank World Bioenergy Association for organizing the webinar on this very important topic. And my name is Jinlei. I'm the program officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency based in Abu Dhabi. So I very much agree with what Farah has shared about the WBA, the Biomethane Vision Document, highlighting the urgency of the key policy recommendation to scale up the biomethane, which is very much important in current situation. And actually from IRENA side, we do a lot of work focused on the bioenergy, including biomethane. This is one of our key working area, looking at the bioenergy role in the energy transition, statistic for both generation and off-grid, also check both technology and policies. So today, I just would like to highlight some of the key enabling policies we see how to scale up the biomethane and biogas in the building sector. If you look at the figure, actually, from IRENA, our World Energy Transitions Outlook, we see that bioenergy actually play a very essential role to achieve a net zero future. So, because we all know that huge potential from this can replace the fossil fuels in all the end-use sector. So as also the vision document mentioned, not only the industry building, but also transport. So we see that in the overall net zero scenario from IRENA, the biogas and the biomethane will increase by almost 15-fold from now to 2050 to almost achieve around 8 exajoule by 2050, the consumption. And the majority of this consumption of biogas and biomethane will be for the building sector. Actually, if you look at the building sector in our estimation, the biogas and the biomethane will be the largest bioenergy source for this sector, providing around more than 43% of all the bioenergy consumption in buildings. In some contexts, I mean, if you look at long term, not only now because of the energy crisis, if the low cost feedstock available and also tax burden can be low, the biomethane can be very cost competitive compared to the fossil gas options. But we also see that many barriers must be overcome if the world wants to achieve the needed deployment level. For example, this kind of two different level of barriers. First is cross-cutting to all the bioenergy and also biogas. And another is that actually, if we look at current consumption globally, only a very small share, we see that around 10% or less of the biogas upgraded to biomethane. So only these barriers can be overcome, the scale up will be more feasible and can be accelerated. So we see that some highlighted barriers, we see weak policy attention actually given to the renewable heating and also especially the biomethane, and also the weak supply chain, the gas grid infrastructure, and also among others. You can see addressing these barriers actually we see require very strong policy and recommendation and regulation to enable the market and also create a level playing ground with the fossil fuels. And also some key measures, we see that biomethane consumption targets also carbon pricing policies, and most importantly, the sustainability criteria for the feedstock. All these policy and recommendations actually already highlighted in the Biomethane Vision Document. But I would like to echo two. We see that most urgent enabling policy. The first is the ban of the fossil fuel heating. If you look at the building sector, the ban of fossil fuel heating not only fuels but also applies to create a market opportunity for low carbon fuels and especially biogas and biomethane. And as Barrow already mentioned, a number of European countries and even cities, they have such restriction or timeline to phase out the fossil fuel use for heating, and also obligation targets increase the biomethane, the percentage of biomethane in the natural gas grid, also a good way. One example also mentioned by Farah is Denmark, the target for near future and the long term for the biomethane gas grid. But also in the meantime, I would like to highlight the measures to ensure the sustainability of feedstock. This is one of the most fundamental elements to all the bioenergy. We also see that there's no one fit all solution. It should be contextualized and engage all the stakeholders. But we do encourage that all the target setting should integrate the sustainability consideration, but also the coordination in the whole process to coordinate among all the different departments, if not only the biomethane for the heating for building, but also the feedstock and the gas grid. So we also see that the important role of the certification schemes and the partnerships to ensure the treated biomethane between different regions, different countries to ensure it's traceable. And also in some contexts, there's no regulation, but we see that the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, the indicators can help to help the policymakers to improve the sustainability of their practice. So actually, we see that the World Bioenergy Association, the Biomethane Vision Document has provided very, very good guidance for policymakers in industry players for scale up the deployment of biomethane, which has significant value for near term, but also long term. So we look forward for continued discussion and future collaboration with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jinli, and thank you very much for endorsing the conclusions of the vision document. We'll carry on quickly because we have really a large number of speakers here for today's webinar, and we carry on with Jonas Svensson. He is Senior Vice President and Head of Innovation and Trading at Nature Energy, which is one of the largest biomethane project developers, I think, in the world. So Jonas, from your point of view as project developers, what are the main barriers that you would like to see removed as soon as possible? Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I assume you can hear me. Please not.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Cool. So I think we internally, we have one phrasing that says, we need 5 things in order to realize a large-scale biomethane facility, basically at the pace that we can build it. We need 10 hectares, we need access to the grid, we need permitting done. Let's see, we need a risk backstop, and we need to make sure that the biomasses have an incentive to flow into the facilities. I think primarily, we've been active in Europe for now. We're also starting to look at North America. I think our overall feeling or experience is that some markets will have some of these addressed, but none of the markets will have all of them addressed. And specifically, none of them will have them addressed in the same way. Every market has its different ways at looking at what's the waste management process, what's the permitting process, what's the access, how can you utilize 10 hectares of land? How are you allowed to connect to the grid? All of this is different. I think I think in general, we pretty much agree with everything that's been said so far. What are going to be the important drivers? I think we'd probably have a couple of issues where we might differ. In terms of the readiness of technology, we probably tend to say that technology is mature enough, but it's nowhere close to mature. There are so many things that we still need to become a lot better at. So fundamentally, we've become pretty good at producing gas, but we need to become even better at converting electricity into biomethane, or actually producing enough electricity that it's relevant to turn it into biomethane. We need to be much better at showing a good fertilizer product. We need to figure out how to coexist together with agriculture, where we have sort of stable carbons that can go back onto agricultural soil to improve soil health. I think the other point where we'd probably be a bit divergent in terms of some of the other messaging that's been given, we don't worry too much about alternative ways of financing. What we've experienced with the portfolio facilities that we already have in place, I realize that given that we've just been bought by somebody, our new future may look different. But what we've seen in project development so far is that as long as you have a good project where you know where to place the gas and at what value and how to secure your feedstocks, financing is not an issue. There are so many sources of finance if you have a good project. And what do we mean by a good project? Basically, it means that we know where to get the biomasses. We know what regulations they come under. We know how to handle them. We know how to turn them into gas. But in particular, we also specifically know how to get the molecules into a market that allows us to run the facility for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So the whole market side of, and we have a preference for market-driven demand over support-driven demand on the production side, simply because we think, or we have the experience that a demand-driven market is much more stable than a support mechanism-driven market. We're happy to take the support if that's what's out there, but we'd much rather see a demand-driven market development. Our current experience in Europe is that the demand side and the supply side is not being facilitated in meeting each other, in particular because the member state implementation and regulation and uncertainty on where does which molecules count creates a lot of uncertainty and lack of visibility on the value of our production in high feedstock areas compared to high demand areas. So bridging that gas and making some of that obscurity go away, we think will go a long way towards facilitating new investments in large-scale biomethane facilities. Yeah, I could do this all day, but probably those would be my main takeaways.
Thank you very much, Jonas. That was really interesting to listen to you. So if you're talking about demand side driven market development, are you talking about quotas that should be achieved by within the gas market, or what kind of demand side mechanisms are you thinking of?
I'll take all of them. I fundamentally quota on heating, quotas on transportation. If we could just have all the companies that signed up to sustainable based targets, so science-based initiative target setting, if they could be legally required to deliver on their decarbonization, I'd take that. So fundamentally, any kind of driver or price or long-term stable outlook for where's the long-term demand for renewable energy coming from or decarbonized energy coming from, I'll take that and I'll make my investment cases based on where I can produce it the cheapest and sell it the most expensive.
Right. Thank you very much. And now we switch again from Europe to Asia. And I would like to welcome very much Raguna Raguna is founder and CEO of the KIS Group, that is probably the most successful developer of biogas plants in Southeast Asia. So Raguna, please show us how you are doing things in this area of the globe.
Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you. And thank you so much, WBA, and thank you to Christiana for having me in this wonderful session. We're happy to share how things are happening in Asia. Just a quick intro of a few seconds what we are. We have been one of the largest in Asian market, doing biomethane projects since the last 17 years. This is one of the, I would say, the most interesting and most challenging and most innovative project happening in Asia. Is Asia's largest what we call decarbonization project. Unilever has the largest facility for them in the world in Indonesia. So we'll be supplying biomethane to them to replace fossil fuel used in the facility. So this is overall 13,000 MMBTU per day potential. In next 5 years is target. So the first phase, we are 1,000 MMBTU will be commissioning by this year. So this is a complete net zero concept, which is a practical project what we are sharing. So it will decarbonize 3 sectors. It will decarbonize the agriculture sector, it will decarbonize the transport sector, because even the transportation will be using it biomethane driven trucks. It will decarbonize Unilever as well. So this is one of the largest decarbonization project happening in Asia. Next. And coming to other countries in Asia like India and Malaysia. In India, we have done 3 pioneering projects. First of them is animal manure to biomethane project with own dispenser. It was commissioned almost 3 years back. And the biggest trend is biofertilizer, which is very common in all biogas plant. But here, what we are making is packaging the liquid fertilizer and also granules. As you can see in the slides, we are making the first project in Asia for sure to make granular based organic manure from the animal manure. So this has got huge demand, and these projects are more profitable from selling this organic fertilizer than biomethane. In the European context, probably, I'm not sure how the economics work, but in at least in the Indian context right now, the revenue is more from selling organic manure. So more focus is given on getting a validated product. In all 3 projects, we have a different brand name. So it depends, it caters local market there. And we also generate power in each sector. And in one of the project, the third one you can see here, we are supplying biomethane to the housing complex, which is one of the first, I would say, in India, and I would believe in Asia also. And similarly, we are doing one project in Malaysia, is not on the slide here. 2 villages in Malaysia, we are supplying biomethane with a pipeline. So these 2 will be the world's first 2 villages, wherein they'll be getting biomethane in a pipe connection. So in Asian context, yes, a lot of things are happening. And the same biofertilizer demand is going to increase in Indonesia and Malaysia also. And similarly, in Indonesia, we are doing for 2 more in Malaysia. So entire Southeast Asia and Asia, when India is picking up. And we are also discussing with Japanese big companies to export Bioenergy back to Japan from the project in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Southeast Asia. Yes, things are quite happening in Asian market. Thank you so much, and that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Raguna. You were mentioning quite a number of very fascinating and very innovative projects, from fertilizer production all the way to bio-LNG export. So quite amazing what kind of advanced technology approaches you're following up. So I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
So,
well, the technologies, go ahead.
Go ahead, Raguna.
The technologies are quite advanced we are using. So we are using latest technologies. We have our own manufacturing facilities. So we have some type of Japanese, some type of Denmark, some type of Germany. So we are having quite advanced technologies, which are the best in the world. We have a developed joint venture with them. So we are adopting one of the best global technologies. Thank you.
Great job. Great job. Thank you, Raguna. We carry on with a question that is, again, more relevant in the European context, and that is the issue of being able to identify renewable gases or to identify biomethane as something different than natural gas, also in terms of trading it. And for that purpose, we have a very competent speaker on the subject, which is Jesse Schaaf. He is from the European Region Renewable Gas Registry, which has, I think, committed to support this difference between natural gas and biomethane. Jesse, the floor is yours. Please use the presentation mode.
There you go. How's that? Can people see me? And
yes, we can see it. The only thing is the presentation mode.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent.
Thanks very much for having me on today. I'm Jesse Schaaf. I'm the president of the European Renewable Gas Registry. We're an association of biomethane registries and other people and economic operators in the biomethane market. So for 5 or 6 years now, we've been tracking the development of guarantees of origin and other types of certificates and building systems to exchange those certificates between different registries. I've only got one slide for you, so I'll be very quick and just highlighting the essential points around this biomethane certificates and the role they play. So very pleased to see in the WBA report, one of the key recommendations was that top point that introducing a certificate system is a prerequisite for tracking and balancing biomethane and enabling trade, and we couldn't agree more. The reason for that is that it allows you to deliver the value to an end customer. And I think Jonas made that point very clearly, that he would love there to be a stable framework for end customers to be able to receive their biomethane. And that's what guarantees of origin and other certificates can do. And what you get when you have that framework in place is a price discovery process, where the government can then adjust the support that they're giving and the market mechanisms that they put in place, depending on how much income the producer can receive, either from a private market because they're selling a guarantee of origin and it's being bought voluntarily, or because there's some type of certificate that is going to the end customer and allowing them to claim a subsidy. So that's about price discovery. It's written into this Renewable Energy Directive very clearly, as you can see on the screen, that member states should ensure that when a producer receives a financial support from a support scheme, so a government subsidy, the market value of the guarantee of origin should be taken into account. And that's what we see in the UK in the impact assessment for the subsidy that they have in place now. It's assumed that the producer will be selling natural gas at the natural gas price, that they'll receive £2 a megawatt hour from the guarantee of origin sale, and the government have reduced downwards the amount of support they can offer, but that means the pot of money they put in can go further and create more biomethane. Now, £2 a megawatt hour is a very conservative assumption. The price today in Europe is over £20 a megawatt hour. So particularly at the early stages in the development of the market, of course, not every gas consumer can afford to pay £20 a megawatt hour on top of the natural gas price and the other associated costs of receiving their gas. But when you have a small number of very committed consumers, whether they've got science-based target initiatives, they're signed up to SBTIs or other disclosure and target schemes, or they're private consumers, households who are committed to greening their gas supply, with that small group of customers willing to pay a significant premium, not to cover 100% of their gas use, but maybe even 5 or 10%, that is a really good starting point. And of course, if you've got, you need that certificate scheme in place. Quick note there, I've done a rough calculation recently, and I think in the last 7 or 8 years, over £200 million has been spent by consumers on certificates of various types. And that is over and above any value they might get back from the purchase of those certificates. So that is pure additional income into the biomethane market. You might want to divide that by a number of biomethane plants. So in my mind, you could build 20 biomethane plants with that. Of course, it doesn't work directly in that way, but it gives you an idea of the extra value and what that can result in. So I'm focusing here on when customers just put that additional value in to buy the green value for voluntary emission reporting. But also there are cases where the whole support mechanism comes from the consumer getting a financial reward for having received the gas through the grid. So there are biofuel tickets of various types in the EU and the UK, and there's also the EU ETS and the UK ETS, which there is increasing clarity about how to receive biomethane through the grid and get a benefit through the ETS scheme. So for that to work, you need a really robust system, and it's been quite piecemeal in Europe. Biogas been pushing to improve those processes and systems in different ways. And what we're all looking for now is what's something called the Union Database for bioliquids and biogases, which is in development, being launched now, and definitely something to keep an eye on if you are producing biomethane or using biomethane in Europe. Okay, thanks very much for your time. And I'll hand over to the next person.
Thank you very much. Jesse, just one question to fully understand. I mean, we have a situation where we have different guarantees of origin in the different countries, right? How do you see the possibility to match them and to have a consistent European market of guarantees of origin? Is that within reach, or is that an illusion that we will never be able to achieve?
Well, the second Renewable Energy Directive was published in late 2018. It was very clear that there would be that gases would be there would be guarantees of origin for gas and hydrogen and biomethane. It referred to the SEN 16325 standard, and we're still waiting for that standard to be agreed. It was recently put to a vote, and there was no agreement on moving forward with publishing that standard. So the framework's really clear. Every European member state will operate according to the RED II framework. They will run a guarantee of origin registry according to the 16325 standard, but not everything's been published yet. And of course, the UK is in a slightly different situation. So yeah, it's within reach, but things move very slowly.
Fine. Thank you very much, Jesse. And that takes me to our next speaker. Jan Liebetrau is, among other things, engaged in the International Energy Agency's Bioenergy Agreement in Task 37. And Jesse, I think you have been looking at the topic of methane slip. So how important is that topic, and what kind of possibilities are there to reduce methane slip in biogas plants?
Yeah, hello everybody, also from my side. Can you hear me and can you see my slides?
Yeah, absolutely.
To tackle the methane emission topic, I would like to start with a little definition here, because this translates quite directly into the mitigation options you have. And first of all, from my perspective, we have the methane slip, and this is a process-specific methane which is not converted, which is not being able to separate in an upgrading process, for instance. And this is specific to a certain technology. And this is something you can reduce in this process, but you can never avoid this to 100%. And this is a different thing compared to a leakage, because a leakage is a hole in a supposed to be gas-tight system. And this is something you just have to find, and then you can repair it, and then it's reduced to nothing. And the third term, which is used quite often, is diffuse emissions. And this is something which you cannot really measure because it's too large in number or it's too small. Usually it's very small and large in number, that's the problem. And that's why this is summarized. So the effort to measure this in detail is simply too high. And this can be the case on site, but it also can be the case if you look from a sector. If you want to quantify the emissions from the whole sector, then of course you cannot go to every plant and do a detailed emission analysis. All sources have specific characteristics, so they can be time variant, they can come out of a pipe, they can come out of an area as an open digestate storage, for instance. And so this always results in different methods and different difficulties to measure and to quantify them. There have been in Europe several attempts to measure emissions from biogas plants. There are a lot of publications. There are a few publications on it. What has been found in these investigations, in these measurements, is that the emissions are highly plant specific. This is simply due to the fact what components, what technology is installed on site. This is related to the methane slip, what I just said. But also on the, how to say it, accidentally or other than normal operation emissions, which are caused, for instance, by leakages. And you can see this is a summary here of several investigations which have been done in a large research project. And you can see that there's really a high variability in the emissions. Usually you have the case that there's only a few sources which dominate the overall emission factor. So if you have an open digestate storage, if you have a CHP, then of course these are significant contributors to the overall emission factor. And that's why you really have to check what is the main emission source and then different mitigation options approach. And due to this high variability, it's also very difficult to give a standard value for the sector. So you can't say the biomethane or the biogas sector has 1 to 3% emissions, because you need to know what technology is installed on all these plants. And then you need to have a statistical evaluation what these technology components emit in average. And this makes quite a lot of effort to really estimate the overall emission of the sector. To finalize, what options do you have for mitigation? Most obvious and also very often done is, of course, leakage detection. So go on your plant with a camera which can visualize methane emissions and find major leaks and repair them. Very easy to do. Just do this frequently, and then you can make sure that your plant has no unwanted emissions. Methane slip, you can post-treat the off gases. This holds true for upgrading facilities, but it also holds true for CHP. And then you can reduce these emissions next to nothing. Or in the first place, you choose technology which has lower emissions. So it's a different if you have a membrane or a PSA or a water pressure system for the upgrading or amine wash. And these all have different slips. And then you, of course, with choosing such a technology, you cause different emissions. Same holds true for digestate storage. If you cover that gas state, there's no emissions anymore from there. And there's also some specific emissions which I would like to mention here as well. Overpressure releases have been identified also as a source of significant emissions, but this can be easily avoided by just setting up a plant operation in a way that avoids such emissions. So that means, for instance, have during operation a filling level of your gas storages not more than 50%, and having a flare in place which starts to combust biogas as soon as the filling level of the gas storages exceeds, for instance, 90%, and in such a way you can actually avoid overpressure events. That's from my side. For further information on this topic, you're free to contact me, or you also can download the brochure on methane emissions from the IEA website. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Jan. So that was really interesting, and an issue that really affects all plants, essentially. My question is, I mean, in a way, methane emissions are a quality issue also for biogas plants. So how have you ever thought about establishing something like a certification, for example, that certifies companies that or producers that achieve a certain amount of tightness, if you would like to say so, and have a certain quality in terms of environmental performance?
There are initiatives in several countries usually from the Biogas Association, to support operators which are engaged to reduce their emissions. And these are voluntary systems, so the plant operator can go into this system, and then they have a certain procedure where they look for emission sources, where they want to reduce them. And in Sweden, for instance, they also have an external evaluation of the plant for these emission sources in place. And by doing so, you, of course, increase the awareness with the plant operators, and you reduce substantially emissions, because if you frequently check for these sources, then of course chances are much lower that you have unwanted emissions. And they get as kind of a certificate that they take part in this. And I think that's actually quite important and also a valuable contribution, because it also brings, it's not, you do not force the people into that. It's a voluntary system. And I think this also has a certain positive impact.
Thank you very much for that, Jan. So that brings us to our last speaker, Christian Quinault from Bioenergy. And Christian is going to give us the perspective of an investor. So what is needed to facilitate investment into biomethane projects? Christian, please. You are still muted, I think. Let's see. I think
can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
All right. So I will try to be quick and sharp. Thank you very much, Christian, and thanks, Jan, for the insightful presentation earlier. I will just share my screen and go on presentation mode. I will try to keep it sharp for the sake of time. Basically, to facilitate investments and also a good share of the rewards, I will really echo what Peter said at the beginning of this webinar. It's really about the permits. Permit is probably the most difficult thing to get. And I would say that for financing a project, it will really depend on whether the project has the permit or not yet. So I would differentiate project development and project execution. And for these two kind of big, if you wish, stages of a biogas project, there is different requirements. So during the project development phase, you will want to invest into the people, the team. Do they have the biogas track record? You will invest into the land. Is that a good idea? And do they have an option on the land, really? On the feedstock and the digestate, is there enough proof points that there is enough feedstock, and the cost of getting rid of the digestate has been considered? And then, of course, the route to markets. Are you going for the subsidy scheme, or are you going for customers? So that's really around the project development. And of course, at this stage, there are more risks, and therefore the financing would be more costly, so to say. Once the project has been permitted, then it's about executing the project. And there, I would say that it's a mature AD, anaerobic digestion is a mature technology, and therefore it will just be a matter of executing the project and the future operation. So the risks are much more limited. Of course, we will need to check that the permit that has been acquired is fit for purpose, that the design is resilient to feedstock changes. We need to realize that feedstock prices are evolving, and a biogas plant, to reassure financiers, will need to demonstrate resilience on the design. Resilience also on the route to markets. Are we just producing bioenergy or injected biomethane? This gives us different outlets and different different way to monetize the biomethane. And of course, how secure is the feedstock, the digested? Not easy to have long-term contract on the supply side. And then, of course, the economics. How sensitive are the revenue and the cost streams for financial investors? So these are really the different phases. Just to summarize, the permit being the key element, which will define the risks and the rewards for the different parts of the project. So that's it from my side. Any questions or comments?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was very important to also keep in mind that plants need to be financed and to also pay attention to the requirements of financing organizations. So with that, I think we have to close our webinar. We are closing it exactly in time. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. We will make the recording of this webinar available, as well as the slides that have been shown. And I invite you to pay attention to the next webinars. We have a whole range of interesting topics that we will deal with throughout the coming year. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much once again. Goodbye, Christian. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Nice to meet you all.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Garo. Nice seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.